Hey there, I'm Taz Singh, and I've been working with communities for as long as I can remember. Fundamentally, communities are made up of people, so this is my journey going to those communities and talking to those people. Come along with me. Amazing. So I'm now here with Maggie. I met Maggie, I guess, in October back at React Advanced London, and it was my first time kind of getting to know Maggie and kind of like learning more about the things that Maggie's into. If I'm not mistaken, I guess you're probably best known for all of your drawings, being able to express very complicated technical subjects in very simple terms. Is that right? Is that a right way of kind of introducing you? Or?
I suppose yes. What I mostly got known for was I spent 5 years working as the art director at Egghead. So that's a education company where they teach essentially just JavaScript topics through mostly video lessons. But I was in charge of both creating and commissioning illustrators to create illustrations for these courses. So both cover illustrations that kind of promote the course and encapsulate the course material in a single visual metaphor, but also educational material within courses that's diagrams, animations, interactive features that help get across like the core mental models of whatever the developer was trying to explain in visual language.
It sounds complicated.
It's just drawing pictures.
Just drawing pictures, he says. I mean, if you've seen me draw pictures, you'd have more questions than you have answers. You know, I'm terrible at drawing anything. I'm also terrible at coding, and so it's just compounding terribleness. If that was me, but if you've ever taken a look at anything Maggie's created, it's remarkably simple and it's remarkably easy to kind of just look at and kind of just visually understand. And so I guess for me, how do you arrive at that? Like, do you like how many drawings do you do, or how much coding do you do, or what do you do? I guess,
right, exactly. Like, how do you even come up with an illustration?
How do you arrive at that? Because I would assume it probably takes a lot of work to get there.
Yes, yeah. I suppose over my years at Egghead, I did end up developing quite a rigid system in a way. But in the beginning, it was a lot more flailing about. I'll definitely say that. Like, I would be handed a topic like, Redux is a classic one, right? Like, some course on writing actions in Redux, and it's like you have to understand what Redux is and then try to find some visual that represents what is essentially like a very abstract programming topic or framework or library or whatever the thing is. So I would definitely watch course videos. I would try the code out myself. I would read documentation, make sure I had at least a general understanding of what the thing did. Even if I maybe didn't know every technical detail about it, I had to make sure I had a strong, what I would say is a mental model of the system. And then I would do a lot of exploration of language, so I pay attention a lot to the specific nouns and verbs that developers use when they talk about how systems work, because that's usually indicative of the embodied metaphors that kind of underlie the system. And when I say embodied metaphors, what I really mean is the physical traits that we're mapping onto computational systems. So we usually will structure things in terms of thinking something is inside another, or something is connected to another, or something is above something else and passes props down. So we speak about abstract computational topics in very physical terms because humans only know the physical world. This is where we live and breathe and move things around. So we have to talk about all abstract things based on our embodied experience.
That's interesting. It's very skeuomorphic in that way, I guess.
Yes,
it's like to use that old term, but I'm probably using it incorrectly nonetheless. But that's very interesting.
Very
so
related.
It's essentially just hearing you say all that, it kind of invokes past memories I've had of dropping out of university, where I studied cognition and studying cognition.
Very related.
We studied a lot about language and language theory and kind of how does essentially semantics and grammar influence kind of learning and mental modeling. Is that what kind of inspires you as well, or?
Yes, I've read a lot of cognitive scientists. My favorites are George Lakoff and Mark Johnson were the people that came up with cognitive embodiment in the 1980s and wrote a lot about how we can use language as a lens to understand how we perceive the world and the structures that we build cognitively to understand it. I love their work. I love a lot of the new embodied cognition work that's happened over the last 2 decades. So I guess I end up reading a lot of cognitive scientists, but in the end goal of trying to figure out ways to visualize programs in ways that are more accessible and more understandable to people.
Right.
And that does require understanding how the human mind works and how we interpret visual input.
Right. Which I think kind of goes back to kind of what you're saying at the beginning there. It's about creating that framework of understanding and then kind of that framework of evaluation, which you spent a lot of time thinking about, like while working at Egghead. And it sounds like kind of those cognitive scientists helped kind of structure that framework in a way, because I mean they've spent obviously so much of their time studying kind of similar frameworks and kind of parallel spaces. So I think that's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I love all the cognitive science stuff, and I suppose I also got it from I studied anthropology originally, and I did a lot of linguistic anthropology. So it gets into that too of what language you speak and what culture you belong to determines how you see the world.
Oh my God! This is what I dropped out of university while trying to attempt to study. So this topic fascinates me. Essentially to my end, I think my battery will die in the camera, and I'll still be talking to you about this type of thing. Something that's always kind of. Been top of mind for me is especially traveling and being part of communities and kind of talking to people is I'm always jealous of people that can speak multiple languages. I'm not sure about you. Can you speak multiple languages?
No, I always say I'm language handicapped in that I grew up overseas living in foreign countries since the age of 6, and I was in Hong Kong, Vietnam, Thailand, Singapore. I moved to the US for a while. I lived in Amsterdam for a while, and I speak no languages other than English.
Wow.
So I learned all of those languages, had to go to lessons, and was immersed in it, and just that I'm very, very bad at learning languages, and that sounds like some excuse, but I swear it's just I can't remember any vocabulary. Anytime I try, it just comes out as gobbledygook. So I'm handicapped.
I think the real problem, Maggie, is that everyone else speaks such good English, and so honestly. It's not our fault. It's just everyone else's fault for just speaking such good English. Is what I tell everyone, and so.
I admire people that speak other languages, and I've try to the extent to once you can understand different things, understanding a way another language's grammar is structured, even getting your head around that gets you to understand a different way that the language might be perceived and spoken.
And so there's an example that I often think about, because I studied a little bit of German, so I can speak a touch of German, bad German, but a touch of German. And so in German, a classic example is in English you say 99. You would have kind of the 90, so essentially the tens number. 90 and then 9, and so you can from that first word you can kind of get a sense of scale, they're talking something in the 90s, so 99. In German it's 99, and so it's 9 and 90. And so you don't actually know the scale of what they're talking about until that last word. And so you kind of know it's 9, but 9 what? 9, 29, 39, 99. Oh my God, you know what I mean? And so you don't really know up until that last word. And so much of German is that way. And I swear, a German person's gonna be watching this and be like, "Das, nein, was ist das?" So I think another thing that kind of took me away with German was if you say I'm going to the store, I think it's ich habe zu Laden gegangen. I have the store gone. And so you don't know what you did to that store until that very last word again. You don't know if you've stole from the store. You don't know if you've burnt the store down. You don't know if you bought a store. Maybe you're into real estate, or you have no idea what someone's doing until that very last word. And essentially from a cognition perspective, that kind of fires on all cylinders. It kind of fires the neurons. The synapses are firing on all cylinders. Kind of like what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean? Up until that very last word that everything's kind of clarified, or basically ja genau, as you say in German. It's kind of clarified at that very last word. And it's interesting how the cultures have transformed in such a way where in English you say I'm going to the store, I've gone to the store. You know what you're doing before you know what you're doing it to. The store is kind of the last thing. But anyway, I've gone off on a massive tangent.
No, I don't think it's a tangent at all. That's great.
Because I think she's just being polite. But I've gone off on a massive tangent because this is what I was saying. Is I feel like I could talk to Maggie about this well after the camera dies and just continue talking about you, miss my flight back home, and then still be enjoying talking to Maggie about this. So. But interesting. So apologies for interrupting repeatedly. But I guess going back to the actual drawing, because as you said, coming up with a framework of understanding and coming up for a framework of explanation. You're clearly incredibly well versed from a multitude of dimensions on that. But language is one thing. Drawing is another.
Yes.
How do you bridge that gap?
So I trained as an illustrator earlier on in my career. So in my early 20s, I thought I was going to be an illustrator forever. photographer. And I much more work as like a more holistic designer now and cross over into dev and kind of like design management stuff. But early on, I spent a lot of hours investing in just learning technical drawing. Like I'm also a bit of a details nerd. Like I want things to be correct, you know, in terms of like perspective and lighting and that sort of, like drawing is a very technical skill. And one you can teach yourself or anyone can learn in the same way you learn like calculus. It's very much, it's like, honestly, the thing is just math. You're like, when you learn to draw perspective, you're just learning very well established rules that were like created in the Renaissance, right? Like that are like how to calculate exactly where the points on a box should be. And I really did love that part of it, but it definitely got my skills in technical drawing quite high. And so then when it comes to being able to draw concepts of like programming, I don't have to spend much mental energy thinking about how I'm going to represent it, because drawing sort of 3D shapes in space is kind of the core skill there. And because I already had that, it wasn't that much of a challenge. It's still hard. I still have to like go through iterations and maybe like do 3D models to really get things correct and draw over them.
Yeah. Well, if you ever need someone to be like, hey, Taz, do you understand this? To really make sure it's dumbed down to the absolute lowest level, I'm always here to kind of say a yay or nay if it makes any sense or not. But like that's interesting. So like, I think you said jest to a lot of things there. You said it's just like learning calculus, or it's just drawing.
It's very complicated. Actually, I shouldn't.
it's just knowing Redux, and I mean, I don't think you can say the words jest and Redux in the same sentence.
Yeah, that's true.
or jest and calculus in the same sentence. And so all those things individually are quite complex. But I think again, like I think you've been so immersed in it for so long that you think of it quite fluidly and kind of as more of a more singular unit perhaps than people like myself or maybe others. But okay, so that's what helps you kind of draw it and kind of break it down and I'm assuming you go through multiple iterations, as you said, and then kind of really refining it and everything.
Yeah, because I mean, most of getting a drawing to look good is really about composition. So it's like what we usually say, it's the arrangement of shapes in space, which is like very abstract, right? Like, how do you make something look good? Oh, well, you have to arrange the shapes correctly. And it's like, well, what in the world does that mean? There are sort of fundamental design principles you'll pull upon, like contrast and shape relationships. So like, having a big shape next to a small one, like the human eye like certain arrangements of things like that, because maybe it is that they occur naturally in nature. There's all sorts of like theories of why we like certain images and why we don't like others. But there are kind of tricks you learn where you're like, okay, I know if I kind of put like a big circle next to a medium one, next to a small one, and they're sort of spaced this far apart, it will look good.
Is that like golden ratio type stuff, or is it?
There's a bit of that. Rule of thirds is another one if you put things in thirds. A lot of it isn't. You can kind of read rules about it, but at some point you have to kind of intuit a lot of it. It's like you kind of learn how to compose shapes in a way that look good, and you have to sort of look at enough things that look aesthetically pleasing and break them down. We do a lot of like copies. We'll copy other people's work a lot early on in illustration training. Yeah. And from that you get this muscle memory of understanding what shapes look good together, which sounds strange.
No, it sounds like you know what, like you mentioned programmers in the 80s, programmers in kind of those days, and there's one saying that kind of sticks with me like to this day, which is basically the 90-90 rule. I'm not sure if you've heard of that rule.
This, no.
And so like everyone knows the 80-20 rule. This is not the 80-20 rule. This is the 90-90 rule. And so I think it was a guy by the name of Tom Cargill, Bell Labs, like way back in the day, like working on kind of those early user interfaces and all of that. Basically everything like essentially Apple ripped off and then kind of monetized at much larger success. Like he was working in that lab back then, and he came up with a rule called the 90-90 rule, which is the first 90% of time working on something is the first 90% of time you spend working on it, and then the last 10% of time is the other 90% of the time you spent working on it, which I interpret as like obviously like it's difficult to estimate software, it's difficult to kind of not know what you don't know, but I also interpret that as that's really where all the learning happens, is that last 10%. The first 90% is what you find easy to quantify. The first 90% is what you know. The first 90% is what you do well. It's that last 10% where like your paradigm falls apart, your understanding falls apart, you're there trying to learn new things, you're trying to discover new things, and it's that last 10% which is really where 90% of the learning happens. You know what I mean? It's where 90% of the actual discovery happens. And I think like hearing you describe your process and kind of your learning and your knowledge journey, kind of made me think about that, where you said you would repeatedly copy someone else's work and
Yep.
you'd repeatedly kind of take inspiration elsewhere,
Yep.
and kind of get to that 100% on your own, and can continually learn to improve and iterate in that fashion. And that's it sounds like that's maybe what kind of helped build that muscle memory over time.
Yeah, like it is just a lot of hours. Like I don't know, I mean, it's weird. I don't know if you like think back on like your early 20s or something when you just had like no responsibilities and a lot of energy and were willing to just sort of put in like a lot of hours every day, just sort of hammering away trying to gain skills, mostly out of a sense of like you are not useful to the world at that point because you have no skills.
I'm still not very useful to the world. So.
Right. So you have this awareness, right, that like I am not useful at the moment. So you're like, okay, I really need to do something that makes me useful to someone else. Not in a way where you're reducing yourself to like, objects in capitalism. We're not going there. But like, yeah, I just remember having this drive to be like, I have to be really, really, really good at this, and ended up putting in a lot of hours just learning technical drawing very well. And it has ended up serving me well because now I just kind of have that in my back pocket as a skill, and I can pull it out when needed, mostly in services of things that I think are worthwhile, like explaining something complex or being able to draw out diagrams for design concepts. It was useful, I suppose.
I completely agree, and the thing that I love about it is that you're again elevating people, you're helping people. Like knowledge is power at the end of the day, and you're spreading knowledge, and that's literally empowering so many people to do new things and discover new things and follow their passions in ways that they might not have been able to before. And like if you've ever seen Maggie's drawings, it takes complicated things such as Redux or so on and so forth and boils it down to like something you can really understand. And it's like, to me, it's still remarkable to this day, because I mean at the end of the day, as I said, we're all here to elevate each other, and that's really, in my opinion, the worth of an individual is how much impact you can do on things like that. And that's again why I appreciate Maggie. But anyway, I'm going to stop with my little soapbox there. And Maggie, what's the next phase of things that excites you? What's next for you?
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm currently I took on a new job in October, so I'm now leading design at a company called Hash. Where we're essentially doing a lot of data management and simulation work, which doesn't sound terribly sexy, but it's trying to help people structure data in schemas and types, so in helping computers understand human knowledge in a way that's more structured so that we can run simulations and run various views on it to help people understand their data. And in working in this field, and also kind of like previous stuff I had been reading, I've gotten really into the idea of what is called end-user programming, which isn't a phrase that people really say much or talk about anymore, but it was this kind of movement in the 90s that started with anthropologists, so I'm a little bit more inclined towards it because anthropologists came up with it. Or specifically, there's a book called A Small Matter of Programming by Bonnie Nardi. I think it was published in 1991, about this idea of end-user programming is the notion that end users, which today we just call users, so people who use computers and applications, should have the power to reprogram their own machines.
Interesting.
Like everyone, to some degree, not to like a full degree, should have the right to program and develop their computer. Like they should have power and agency over their computer and their machine.
Interesting.
And it's funny to see, because this was like big in the 90s, right? There was all this energy around it, but the way that programming played out is development has become a very specialized profession, right? Like a very highly paid, highly valued, very specialized field that you can go into. And end users, or most people, not only don't have the ability to write programs and write programs for their own devices that like influence their lives and kind of control a lot of the way that their day goes and things like that, they don't even have a concept of how they work, right? Like we have completely hidden all of the programming infrastructure behind GUIs, and we expose absolutely none of it to people, and we give them very few windows into seeing that world. And we've kind of accepted this as like just normal reality, right? Like this is just the way things are. Normal humans use apps, and they have no way to see how the app was built. And we like hide it all away. And if you want to come see it, you have to be like, oh, okay, well, I'm now a developer. I have to train. Well,
it is good for job security. So I don't know what you're getting at here, Maggie. If you're trying to fire me or something, I don't know, because it's not going to work. You know what I mean? The interview cut.
I know.
We're done here. We're done.
I mean, you can see why it might not be popular, right? It's like, well, what if we like took a bunch of money and power away from the developers? Like, who wants to get on board this train? Anyone?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, if it means that I can go sit on a beach with a margarita, I'm all here for it. So we got to we have to work in a bit in the marketing there, Maggie.
I know, it's not the best tagline.
Instead of you doing the programming, you sit on the beach with the margarita, and
Right.
the end user does the programming. See, there we go. We can work in the marketing.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, that sounds fascinating. So
Yeah.
but like again, it's like empowering. Well, sorry, I'm not sure. Like it's kind of. Like my impression of what you just said, and please correct me because I'm probably going to be wrong, is that my impression of what you just said was to take these kind of complex systems and these kind of complex ways that things are currently being built, like basically the complex like norm that we are in today, and kind of simplify and make it more accessible and more approachable by anyone.
Yeah, because like professional developers obviously aren't going anywhere, right? Like the minute you like kind of pitch, I'll say the naive version of end user programming to a developer, like we all immediately are like, what a terrible idea. Like people will just destroy the security on their own laptops if you do not give the user like control over how the design or how the application should look and feel. They'll like wreck it. And that's probably true if you genuinely just gave them the source code and were like, delete whatever line you want.
It sounds like for example, like over COVID, for those of you that know me, like I have a car and I enjoy working on my car now. But I've never worked on my car prior to that. I used to take my car into the mechanic all the time. My mechanic did all the work in the car. Over COVID, I'm like, what better activity than just to work on my own car? It's COVID safe. It's just me working on my own car. You know, there's nobody else there. And at the end of the day, I have a car, which is kind of a climate-controlled chamber where, you know, like it's kind of safe as well. And so I started getting into working on my own car. But it reminds me of kind of that experience where something as easy as changing like some sort of cabin air filter, which you can just kind of pop out, pop in, and you're kind of done. Like that sounds like kind of like end user programming on a car sense. Yeah. But what you don't want me to do is like change rod bearings and the internals of the engine. You don't want me kind of you want to give me like some sort of iron ingot and like some sort of like smelter and expect me to make an engine out of it. Like that'll never happen.
Yes.
So it sounds like kind of the exploration here is how do we essentially make more things accessible to that end user, and like it's really like if this is accessible today and all of this is inaccessible, it's really pushing that boundary down and down and down to make more and more and more things accessible.
Yes.
Is what it sounds like at a very high level.
Yes, no, it's exactly that, right? Like it's not saying let's put the users in charge of the Kubernetes setup, right? It's not saying that. It's saying like, what if you could have a modular interface where they get to pick what menus go where and what items are in the menus. Like there's a version of this in kind of advanced Adobe apps like Photoshop and Illustrator. You can choose, what menus you want to go where, and it's all this like drag and drop, clickable interfaces, and you can kind of customize the setup. You can write your own scripts. You can attach. I love like macros, even something as simple as like there's a program called Keyboard Maestro on Mac, and I know there's like similar ones on Windows where you can write scripts and then hit a hotkey and the script runs. And just something as simple as that, like you do not need to be a programmer, like almost anyone can use it. They have fairly good like GUI interfaces, but you can automate anything that you would manually do on your computer, you can automate with one of these scripting programs. Yeah. And that's the sort of like very simple inroad that gives someone who wouldn't identify as a programmer the ability to like have agency over how their computer behaves. It introduces them to automation. It introduces them to the base concepts of programming without making them sign up for some like new career and like new like training and Java or something. Like, they don't have to like get, SICP. They just have to like write a script and get to do what they wanted to do in the first place.
Oh, that sounds so good, honestly. Like, that sounds amazing. I guess now is an appropriate time for me to tell about how I learned how to code. So I was like, I think 11 or something. Yeah. And I just wanted to make a video game. I as an 11-year-old kid, all you want to do is make video games. And so I just wanted to make a video game. And so I learned of this thing called Java, and I thought JavaScript was Java, and I thought everything just was JavaScript, whatever. I thought scripting in Java was JavaScript, and so I went online. A site called HTML Goodies back then, for those of you that know, and I downloaded like their book on JavaScript, and so I read like chapter 1, I read chapter 2, I read chapter 3. It was like I think 120 pages. As an 11-year-old kid, just reading chapter after chapter. I'm like, where's the video game chapter? It must be the next chapter. Making a video game must be the next chapter. And I read through this whole book, and I couldn't make a video game. And I was so gutted that I just couldn't make a video game after reading through all this literature on how to program, that I went to I was fortunate to have a director of IT at the school I went to. I went to him and I said, hey, I'm trying to learn how to make a video game. And he's like, how old are you again, kid? I'm just like 11, and he's like, well, you got to learn C++ for that, and I'm just like, C plus what? And he's like C++. I'm just like, no, but like it's like 1 plus 2 is like C plus what, you know? And so he's like, no, C++ is the name of the programming language. I'm like, I've never what? And so he gave me some lessons, and I went back like the next week, and I came back with the lesson solved in C++. But if you've ever done anything like that, you know how obtuse it is. It's like basically manual memory management. You got to free your memory, leaking memory like a sieve. Trying to do that on top of like trying to learn the logic and trying to learn like it's just completely and utterly inaccessible. And I think as you were saying earlier, when you're young, when you said early 20s, for me. Even in my early I guess teens, I don't know what the proper word, you know, just all this time and dedication, just kind of pushed through it, trying to get something out. That barrier is way too high. So I think exactly what you're saying about lowering that barrier, making it more accessible, making it more modular, kind of introducing people to early concepts and kind of, you know, incrementing in that way. I mean, like I've been missing this, you know, essentially my whole career. You know, I can only imagine if an 11-year-old kid like me or younger had that, and kind of where like what that would inspire them to do and where that would inspire them to kind of build and achieve. And I think that's huge. Yeah,
and we must be. I mean, we are moving in that direction. Like I think of like, okay, an 11-year-old kid now would maybe use like Apple Swift or something. I know they have like programming for kids apps on the iPad. Like I feel like we're very clearly moving in the right direction with this stuff, where people are all the time inventing interfaces and apps and frameworks that help people get introduced to programming in more gentle ways, right? Or it's like they have a very specific end goal that they just want to create a video game, and it helps introduce them to concepts slowly. And obviously, right, programming education has just exploded in the last couple of decades, like way more accessible. We're all trying to encourage more people to get into it. I mean, I'm hoping to see it like deprofessionalized more in a certain way, right? Like getting quote unquote normal people to like all have programming as some sort of base skill, the way that we all have, let's say, writing didn't used to be a thing that everyone in a society could do. And we all decided collectively to put that into general education and say that everyone in the society is going to know how to write, and not just write, but write well, write persuasive essays. They're going to understand how to critique literature. Like we make everyone do that in like 5th or 6th grade. And we've just decided that's some sort of foundation, and I think it's very clear that's the direction we're still going, that like programming logic is going to be one of those core skills that everyone kind of gets from an early age. Yep. I mean, I couldn't agree more. There's nothing more for me to say to that, other than to say, thanks again, Maggie. I mean, it's just a pleasure talking to Maggie. As I said, she's particular, like in my opinion, and I'm sure there's many other things that you're passionate about, but like in my purview, particularly talented with taking these very complex technical topics, boiling it down to something that anyone, including myself, can understand. And now she's on to the next, it sounds like the next generation of that, with like end user programming, talking more about that, exploring that space. I love that you're coming at it from like a cognition perspective and basically anthropology as well. I mean, like that's like I'm just gonna continue talking to her off camera about all that. So anyway, thanks again, Maggie. Yeah, thank you so much for chatting.
Pleasure.